All right, we have a very special guest. I mean, if you follow One Page Rules, you know him. But Chris from GoodNough Gaming, man, it's so good for you to come on. Chris, thank you again. And how you doing, man?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for having me back. I mean, this is cool. Like repeat appearances. I'm actually hoping to do some of the same things, have folks who've been on before come on again and just see how the game, their hobbying, their channels, how all that stuff has progressed since the last time I talked to them.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's been, just such and that's why I wanted to get you on because when I think about Chris from Good Enough Gaming, you're sort of like I feel you're like the flagship channel of One Page Rules. You're sort of like,
No, that goes to Haunts.
huh? No, I mean, I don't know.
Because OPR, like, I don't know how official it is, but like when they have something new to announce or show off, they show it off on Haunts. All the pictures of games on the OPR channel, that's all Haunts. Which reminds me, I got to get them on the podcast too. So
Yeah, yeah.
thanks for the reminder.
No, well, I guess I don't know. I don't know. I still feel maybe this is just me personally. So maybe I'm showing my own bias here.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. I would definitely say that you're definitely sort of like I said, you're definitely one of the go-to people that I think when it comes to OPR, you've really are very influential in the community, and I wanted to sort of take some time with you, which I appreciate you having, taking time with me to discuss 2024 because I think that OPR in 2024, I feel was an absolutely crazy year. It was
Yes.
just ups and some downs. Just I feel that so much sort of went on, and I'd love to sort of get your thoughts about where you see OPR. First of all, 2024, and where do you sort of see 2025 going in? So, but for those who somehow don't know you, just give us a little bit of your history in wargaming, just and also just in OPR specifically.
Okay. Well, I back when I was younger, no, my whole life before I discovered wargaming, I was fascinated by chess, both the game, but more particularly the pieces. And I loved going to different stores and seeing all the different kinds of themed pieces people have for chess sets. There was something that really drew me to the fact of these little figures
Mhm.
designed to look in certain ways that were designed for a war game. And then when I walked into a friendly local gaming store, I think I was in junior or senior in high school, and saw some guys playing Warhammer Fantasy. And I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, this is a game. Like you build and paint those, and then you play a game with it, and that kind of what got me hooked. And so, various levels, degrees of involvement. I've been in wargaming ever since. So that was the mid '90s
Yeah, okay.
when I first
Yeah.
got involved. So it's been a while, but and like I said, there've been some years where I've been really heavy into it. Other years, life was happening. I wasn't able to. And then I discovered OPR probably I don't know what you call them, the 20 teens. I was actually playing a game of 30K with someone, and just, I
Hmm.
don't know what made him bring it up, but in the middle of the game, he's like, "Hey, have you ever heard of one page rules?" And I said, "No, well, I've never heard. What is it?" And he said, "Well, apparently it's like 40K, but it's a little easier." And at that time, I wouldn't call myself a fanboy, but I was still very happy with Warhammer, both 40K, 30K. And so I'm like, well, I mean, I'm happy with 40K, so I don't see a reason to switch
Hmm.
away.
Okay.
And then for me, it was ninth edition that did
Yeah.
it. I really enjoyed eighth. I know some people thought they didn't like it. They thought maybe it was too simplistic, and there were some elements that weren't perfect. But the switch to Warhammer ninth edition really turned me off for a number of
Hmm.
reasons. Part of it was rules, some of it was business practices. But I then remembered that guy saying, "Hey, have you ever played one page rules? It's like a different or a simpler version of 40K." And that's when I thought, well, why don't I give this thing a try? So I talked to a friend. He's actually been on a couple of bat reps on the channel, Mike. And I said, "What would you think? Would you be interested if I learn the rules and we do just a test out game at your house?" And he said, "Sure, why not?" So we played a super casual game, and I'm sure we got lots of stuff wrong, but we played it, and we both came to the agreement of it felt like a game of Warhammer. It
Hmm.
had a lot of the same elements, but it felt like a game of Warhammer, but it only took us an hour to play it.
Yeah.
And that was our first time. And I thought we must have missed something because we're used to a 2,000 point game of 40K taking 3 hours. And instead, we get a 2,000 point game of OPR that took us 45 minutes to 60 minutes. And we thought, did we do something wrong? So we actually played another one right after, I believe. And again, it was over about 45 minutes to an hour, but it still felt like we we'd had a fun time. We played a war game. It felt like we had tactics and decisions and dice rolls. And I thought, okay, I want to explore this more. If it
Yeah.
can give me the feeling of playing Warhammer, but without a lot of the negatives that I'd come to see or come to bother me, then that was definitely something I wanted to explore more. And it's just kind of as my interest in one page rules got bigger and bigger, my interest in 40K, at least the game, decreased in proportion. And
Hmm.
then I started a channel, and here we are.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I think that you can speak to. I know for myself, I started out. It's funny because I got out at 40K. I played some of sixth, seventh, and eighth, and I played every edition. I would always test it out, but really it was fifth when I kind of got. Sixth edition was just too much, and then I got into War Machine, and I played
Mm-hmm.
War Machine for several years, and it was good. It was different, I guess. But when I got back into ninth and especially 10th, I got back in. I tried those versions out, and I'm like, this is War Machine. Or at least the way I felt about it. It really felt a very different game than the thirds, fourths, and fifths
Mm-hmm.
of where I consider a lot of my quintessential 40K experience to be. So luckily I found, I mean, well, unluckily I found OPR much later, but luckily a lot of my 40K models had been just sitting in the bin for some of them 10 years. I just haven't touched them for 10 years because I'm like, I want to play. Luckily I kept them and I was able to get back into it. But it's interesting because like I still have to say this. I still think that your channel you're sort of the gateway to one page rules and that you really I still remember that those quintessential um video series you did comparing. What was it, 7 or 8 parts, I think, when you did these
Yeah,
big comparisons,
that's
and
the teacher side of me taking over. 'Cause by my day job, I'm a college professor, and one thing that college professors are known for is saying something in 45 minutes that could easily be said in five. So what probably should have just been a one single video, yeah, turned into a 7 part series, and each part was like 45 minutes. And what's funny is after I'd done that, way after I did that one, War Boss Fitz put out a 20-minute video comparing one page rules to GW, and that video got, I think, like twice as many views as all of my parts combined. And I thought maybe I should have done it a bit shorter, but it
I,
is what it is.
I think though yours really delved a lot into the minutia, and I think it's important of context about we do have this weight that Games Workshop, and we've talked about it before, right? I mean, for the different channels, we all know it. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room,
Yeah.
40K. And that when we go into one page rules, our idea of a war game is shaded by 40K. And I love that in those videos, and please go watch them if you haven't. You probably have if you're listening to this. But you get into that minutia about how our perspectives and the context and how it's reacting almost to this. Yeah, I think it's still just it's very valuable, I think. And I think you and Warboss especially, I always think about you two as educators. And in other words, really getting people into the hobby. Do you, I don't know what I can only look at your channel, but I've noticed your
Mhm.
channel has exploded, right? I think what were you at? You're at like 4,000,
Yeah, I'm a
over
little I'm a
4,000.
little over 4,000 subscribers, which surprised the heck out of me. I am tickled pink, not to sound cliche or anything, but when I started that channel, I said to myself, if in one year you don't have 1,000 subscribers, like if this hasn't taken any kind of foothold within a year, then we'll shut it down and say I tried it, didn't work out. Oh well. And I started the channel in late August, I think, and it was January that I had the 1,000 subscribers, and then by the year anniversary of the channel, I think I was at three. And
Yeah.
so I thought, well, obviously there's a tiny little niche here that I've managed to find my spot in. So we keep going.
Well, and I'll speak for me similarly. I had about 270 subscribers at the beginning of the year, and mine has basically, I'm almost 1,200. So it's sort of three, four times. And I think, so really your channel has done the same thing that which is, it's more impressive because at a much larger scale, it's just tripled, quadrupled almost in 1 year. Does that, or is what, this is what I say, I'm saying this all to say, is one page rules, are we getting out of the niche category? Are we starting to enter into the real broader discussion of wargaming now? You know?
That's a no, that's a really good question. I would like to say yes. I would like to say, are we getting out of the niche? Perhaps. Are we entering into the mainstream? Maybe not quite yet, but I think it's a combination of two things that I think the name of One Page Rules, what it is, what can offer to players, is starting to draw in more people at the same time as you have people who are either ditching 40K or they're holding on to 40K but saying, I don't always want to play a 5 hour game.
Mhm.
So it's like a combination of people migrating over from other games versus OPR just naturally growing. And as it grows, more people are discovering it, are jumping onto it. And then everyone that jumps on and discovers it, they're going to tell their friends about it. I mean, this
Mhm.
is a game that there's no other way it's going to spread by word of mouth, just because they don't, as far as I know, don't spend a ton of money on advertising or marketing. And there's a billion other STL creators out there. So it's got to be players introducing other players to
Mhm.
this new game.
Yeah. It's a real. I want to kind of bring up something else because we're talking about 40K in 10th edition. I remember what was it? It was July or June of 2023 when 10th edition came out. And I felt there was, I don't know if you were thinking about it, but I was thinking maybe 10th edition just kills one page rules, right? Maybe, and I remember that. And I don't know if you remember, of course you remember it, but the advertising was strong with this one in 40, in Games Workshop about 10th edition being the greatest thing ever, about
Yeah.
it, and all these things. And I'll get your opinion. My opinion was it's a nothing burger. Right?
Yeah.
A
So
pretty, it's been, I think it's quickly turning into ninth. I think it was ninth simplified, but I think here we are, half, let's talk about that halfway through. People are already talking about 11th edition, and
yeah.
it feels like 10th edition is right back where ninth is. What do you
Well,
think about that?
oh golly, since I don't keep up with 40K with the game rules as much. I do remember when 10th came out and I started reading some of the changes. I thought to myself, they are incorporating some of the things that one page rules did. Like the ability for adding characters and how you treat characters and units and things like that. I didn't think it was going to be the death knell though, because 40K is still it's known for being very rules heavy for like that. That's kind of what it is super complex, a lot of different layers, and one page rules at its core is simplicity. So they can copy some of the ideas, like just like how one page rules took a lot of stuff from 40K. They just flat
Mhm.
out copied it. But 40K could do the same. It could borrow things from one page rules, but they still have two very different goals. Whereas one page rules' goal was to develop a game that was faster, simpler, more focused on gameplay. 40K, it's a company, so they're designed to, keep their price or their profits high and make their shareholders happy and stuff. So I wasn't worried it was going to kill off one page rules, but seeing the changes made me wonder if they're looking across the street
Mhm.
and saying, "Hey, that kid over there is kind of copying what we're doing and pulling away some of our players."
Mhm.
So what if we adopt some of those things? Maybe we can pull those players back. And so that's why I gave 10th edition a shot. I think I played 3 or 4 games. And after playing a lot of one page rules, just 10th edition didn't do it for me.
Yeah.
Back to the whole you take your whole turn, I take my whole turn. I mean, the first game I played, my opponent, he didn't know what he was doing any more than I did. It was 45 minutes for him to take his half of turn one. And I thought we could have played an entire game of OPR in this time.
Yeah.
So the part of it was the unfamiliarity and just the whole, okay, this character has all these rules that affect these units, and these units overlap with these units. And I just thought, this is the complexity that kind of drove me away from 40K. So it, when I after playing those 1 or 2 games, I thought, no, I like the simplicity side of it. So after that, I didn't play a whole lot of 10th. And I've heard people complain, but you'll hear people complain about every edition. So I don't know whether it's, meta wise, whether people are happy with it, sad with it. We know we're going to get a new edition within a couple of years because that's the GW model. I don't know if it's every 3 to 5 years they just release a new edition just because.
I mean, if we are following the 3 year, it is going to be summer of 2026, which is just a year. I'm only
Yeah,
saying this is that it feels like 10th just came out and people are already talking about an 11th. And it's like,
yeah.
wait, where? And like, I don't know. It just feels,
It's so fast.
yeah. I
I mean,
mean,
you can ask everybody who watches my bat reps how often I forget that regeneration is ignored by rending.
yeah.
Like, I forget that every single time. Although I think the last one I did, I finally remembered. So now I got to find some other rule to forget. But just think of how simple OPR is, and I still forget rules like that. Whereas you have something much more complex like Warhammer 40K, and every 3 years you're doing a reset to it. Unless you play that game a lot, you are never going to master the rules enough to really enjoy it. And that's why the games end up taking so long. The one thing 10th edition did that, on the one hand, I was happy with, but it did have kind of a downside was they made it, I don't know how they adjusted the points, but games got bigger model wise.
Yeah.
So it used to be a 2,000 point game. You could expect so many models unless you played guard or something like that. Whereas with 10th, you could have that many models now with 1,500 points or 1,000 points. So games got bigger. And that was one of the things I thought, are they getting that from one page rules? Because one page rules, you could play a 3,000 point game in 2 hours and have a lot of models on the table. So was 40K trying to get back to that? We want our battles to feel more epic. We want them to feel bigger. But by bringing more models, you then add more complexity and rules and overlap, and the games take so long unless you're really, really familiar with it.
Well, and I'm going to polemicize that 10th edition is actually just as bad as ninth. I feel like they've moved the complexity because I know that I've done a lot of work on custom armies. And so I actually went through all the 10th edition in codexes and the free ones, right? And just going through. And one of the things that I think I found was, yes, the stratagems were less, but I find more and more there's more units getting, I call them mini feats. They don't just have abilities, but they have these one-off abilities that you can
Yeah.
cast once. And
Yes.
it feels like there's a lot more in 10th now, where now all these units are sort of getting these mini stratagems. I feel like they've just moved the stratagems
Right.
to
I,
a
I
lot of the
actually
individual mini
I
feats.
counted that. Yeah. Because in the eighth and ninth edition, there were, well, in eighth edition, there were three common stratagems.
Yeah.
And then in every codex, there were like 20 or 15, some 2 dozen, a fairly high number. And they said, okay, we've heard you. There's too many stratagems. We need to cut back on that. And then in 10th edition, there were 12 common stratagems and then like 6 to 10 codex ones. And I thought, you still have
Yeah.
around 20 to worry about. You guys haven't fixed anything. It's just you shuffled it around. Instead of, the peas and carrots, you now have carrots and peas, and you're trying to tell us it's something different.
Yeah, it's very and for me, I try to follow the 40K discourse. I guess as a person who wants to be who like I want to advertise one page rules. I sort of want to be armed. That's I guess my own view. I want to be ready to sort of talk in that nomenclature that 40K has.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do follow some of that discourse. And it's I guess to me I pick up and you're right, everyone complains, but it isn't the same as one page rules. And I want to get into 2020 because we have had some rules things happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it even through all of that, I don't think it's the same. For one, I feel there's just this hopelessness. For better or for worse, the owner of one page rules, you really can get your opinion to him pretty fast through that Discord, and he's
Yeah.
responding. Which is I guess a pro
Yeah.
and con to it.
Yeah. Well, every month, excuse me, he does the live stream and then has Q&A where in
Mhm.
real time he'll answer questions. When was the last time GW asked the opinion of its players? I know they've had surveys in the past. I don't know if they've had them recently, and I certainly have never been able to talk directly to the head of Games Workshop. So because of its size, it's the people who make the decisions are out of touch with the people who play the game.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
OPR is not like that.
Let's get into, so we've, like I said, we've sort of dunked on 40K, but OPR, it's been a really interesting year from rules. I think what I always say is it's a learning year for,
Mm-hmm.
I feel I call it growing pains. There has been an explosion in interest. And one things I feel, what I feel is that I feel we're really starting to see. So we basically, people who've played OPR long enough, they're old-ish guard. And we really have this year, would you agree? We've had this flood of 40K newbies who are just like, I'm tired. I want to play one-page rules, and here's my opinions. And have you felt that push and pull of these two groups? How do you kind of, or maybe not so from your end, how do you kind of see that going on, or with our
So
group?
from the people in my area who play, we still have a pretty small group. I'd say bouncing between say 8 to 12 players who have either played it or expressed interest or something. But a lot of them seem to be, yes, everyone's heard of 40K, but not many are coming from it.
No, really? Okay.
Instead, they've wanted to get into gaming of some kind, and they see 40K and it overwhelms them,
Hmm.
and so they either start with something skirmish related, or they hear someone say, "Well, if you want to get into wargaming, a really good way to get in is one page rules." Now on the channel, I hear a lot of comments of folks who say, "Yes, I left 40K and I'm coming over here." So I don't know where all my viewers are coming from. Most of them, obviously, United States, Canada, North America, and Europe. But I do have comments from people saying, "I used to do this, but I'm done." At least rule wise, they're done with 40K.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. It it's so, but with one page rules though, we started out with 3.0. I think it was in September. I think we had a patch in 3.1, and would you agree? I think there has been some pretty aggressive rule updates this year.
Yeah,
Um, and I sort of say that in a positive sense, that I feel whoever's in charge of one page rules, however that works out, right? That there has been a desire to push the game forward. Is that the right word? Or
I
evolve
think.
it?
Well, yeah.
Or
I think it's that very thing I just I
yeah,
mentioned earlier, where one page rules is building the game with the players.
yeah.
So the designer, it's his baby. So
Hmm.
he gets to officially take it wherever he wants, but he's asking the players and the community for feedback. He's not saying, tell me what to do, but he's saying, this is what I think. What do you think? Or this is where I'm going. What's your reaction to it? I mean, we just had uh, made available the survey, the OPR survey
Hmm.
twice a year. He directly asks for, where are you playing? What do you think about, how are you getting your models? And then at the bottom, just open ended, any last comments.
Hmm.
And so it does look like he's evolving it, and he's trying to direct it to make it what the fans want, while at the
Yeah.
same time still maintaining that it's his game and he can design, like, he has complete control over how he wants the artistic aspect to look. But when it comes to the rules and things like that, I think he's listening to the players, which is what you should do for something like this.
Yeah, it's really it's funny you say that. It makes complete common sense, but we have lived in, at least me and you, we've lived in Game Workshop land for 30 years, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's so foreign to us. I mean, for you to actually say that, it still feels weird to me, right?
Yeah.
That
Even though
there's
they
a
did it
company just
once.
listening. Yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when GW did that survey, I don't know what prompted them to. It was a nice change, but they did that global survey, and overwhelming, everyone said we want plastic sisters. And then a year or so later, they're like, "Okay, you asked for it. Here they are." And
Yeah.
I thought, what a shocking idea! And then, of course, that box set sold like hotcakes. And so I was just hoping that the powers that be over there would go, "Look, you ask your players what they want, and then give it to them. You're going to make money." It's a crazy idea, but let's run with it.
It is a really strange one. And I think for me, I think a lot of what's gone on with one page rules has sort of to me culminated with 3.4, where I felt 3.4 was a huge update, especially to the advanced rules, where he was literally
Yes.
like, here is tons of ways that you can play. You wanted this. I think you mentioned something about degrading. I think you did ever watch one of your videos like,
Yeah.
hey, they put in
Yeah.
degrading monsters and things, and you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. And it's true. It's like all of a sudden, I remember 3.4, it's like the advanced rules and the optional rules just exploded. And all of a
Yes.
sudden he's like, here, play this game, here are some rules, play this game however you want.
Yeah.
And how do you compare that to Games Workshop, which has taken, I feel, the opposite approach, right?
And yeah, because and I think it's mostly about it's a money thing. So GW is a corporation; they have shareholders, and so they're more and I imagine most people who play 40K don't own stock.
Hmm.
We're customers, but we don't own stock, and so we're not pumping in the kind of money that an investment firm would be doing. And so GW's making decisions based on massive spreadsheets and bottom lines and graphs, and they're saying, okay, we're trying to expand our market share, and all the buzzwords that you hear if you've gone through a business degree, which I haven't, so I'm probably missing a bunch of them. Whereas OPR is still small enough that Tano asks the players, he doesn't own, or he's not beholden to any stockholders. All of his funds come from people buying into the Patreon
Yeah,
or
not
buying
models
the
directly. Yeah,
right, or
and it's
buying the STL files. Like
yeah,
he is
yeah.
very, very aware that he has no licensing. He had like, if he drives away his customers, he's done.
Mm,
And so he's having to be very, very, very sensitive to what the customers want. Whereas GW, with its licensing to games and to merchandise and just the sheer momentum that it's been, as you pointed out, it's kind of the lingua franca of tabletop war games for so long that they don't listen to the customers as much anymore,
mm.
which is unfortunate.
But hasn't Games Workshops, even I remember earlier editions, and this was especially true in like second edition was big about all sorts of these optional ways you can play in weird, wonky stuff. And third and fourth did it especially, where you had a lot of optional ways to play. They used to have these in the big rule books. And the other thing I felt those earlier editions 40, you could play different point levels, right? The game scaled up pretty well. But now with 40K, and I even noticed this with Old World, you are really capped to maybe 500 points more because the game sort of gets overwhelmed in complexity. And does that sort of mean that a lot of narrative play, like people want to play mega battles, right?
Yes.
You really
Yeah.
can't do that in 40K anymore, correct? And that's what I mean, is 40K seems becoming so much more monolithic. You can only do it one way, where OPR seems to go the opposite way, right? It's
That's an
saying,
interesting observation. Yeah. And I think it's because of that, there's a corporate tendency to uniformity.
hmm,
Like you go to a major fast food chain and everything down to how you construct the hamburger is completely prescribed. You do
that's
everything
good.
according
Yeah.
because they're looking for uniformity and consistency. And so
Yeah.
when it just seems to me that GW, that's what they're going for. They need to make sure that your experience with Warhammer, whether you're on this side of the world or this side of the world, that it is the same.
Hmm.
Whereas instead with OPR, it's you make it whatever you want it to be. Now, the downside is if you move across the country and you find a new, community of OPR players, they might not play the way that you're used to. You'll have to get used to that. So
Hmm.
there is the flexibility, which is positive. Um, the negatives, there are some, but like I said, that's kind of situational. But yeah, with third edition, or 3.4, I remember going through that advanced rule book, and it was just page after page after page of new stuff, and it was almost overwhelming. So I've kind of set one of the goals that I have for this year, 2025, is every bat rep I do to try out at least one
Yeah.
of those new things. And then after I try it out, make some notes about it, and then I'm hoping near the end of the year to kind of be like, okay, here's what I think of the advanced rules now that I've actually tried all of them. And I've
Mhm.
already found some that I really like. The degrading for monsters and vehicles and stuff like that. That's now pretty much a standard in all games. I use that. Whereas, what did I try? There was another one I tried, and into it, I think I ditched it. I'm like, I don't like this, and so we got rid of it. So it's fun to work through, and I think what it'll allow players to do is kind of construct
Yeah.
their own meta for their game store, for their their own house where they're going to have people come over and play. I do think though that if OPR wants to start going supporting more competitive play though, and they've
Mhm.
already done this because in the rulebook they have the competitive pack,
Mhm.
but I think they'll need to probably narrow it down maybe a bit more, or you'll just have to tell the or allow the tournament organizers to just say, okay, these are the advanced rules we're using for this tournament. That's what defines this tournament, so that's what we're using.
Yeah, and I say this as a person who's a pretty tried and true base OPR player. Like I really before 3.4, I never really tried any of the advanced. Well, like once or twice, but I didn't care for them that much. But after 3.4, when I started playing with the advanced actions, really liked the game. It felt just enough crunch that this feels a lot better. I think it even solved some of the balance issues
Yeah.
where you can do a few things that I think sort of helps out. And I really like that. I really like
Mm-hmm.
that they seem to have really invested, best I can tell, most of their time into those optional rules.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really cool.
But I like how
Um,
at the same time they've kept them in the advanced rules.
yeah, yeah.
So the basic rules, if you're getting into it, it's not all that different to what the basic rules were when you or I first found it. So they're keeping the doorway to the game very, very small. But once you walk in, it's almost like, a single door into a convention hall. Once you're through that main door, there's as many rules as you want to play with, but it's still funneling everyone through that front door.
Mhm. And you brought it up, so I get to bring it up. You brought up a competitive play.
Yes.
They did have the first. I actually went to England and played it and had a blast. It just worked out that way. I've never been to England before, and just, um, but is that something right there that the owner effectively acknowledged competitive play? He's really been a lot more open about it lately.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of coming from a time that I feel in 40K there has been more criticism about competitive play just taking over the game. I follow a channel called Mordian Glory. It's a
Morty and
40K channel,
Glory. Yeah, I've heard of them. Mm-hmm.
and he put out something called what did he call it? Like the new thing called the toxic casual. I don't know if you heard of this.
I
It
saw the thumbnail. I haven't watched it yet though,
it's
but that was an interesting name.
Yeah, where he came up with this term that apparently is in 40K that he's calling it toxic casuals. And I watched it, and from what he was saying, first off, it's a great video, but it's interesting to hear that going on in 40K where there is this a lot of people are getting tired of competitive play. But here Tano is sort of saying, hey, competitive play, it's something that I guess as a person who's I've always felt competitive player was like the black sheep of the OPR community. That like, oh,
Well,
he's acknowledging us. That's great.
well, yeah, and I don't think you're off base with that because one of the things that at least personally, I can't speak for everybody. One of the things that turned me off of 40K was it seemed that rules updates and major changes and stuff were made because of the competitive scene.
Uh,
So in eighth edition, you were allowed to deep strike turn one, and you could charge right off the deep strike, and it made Alpha Strike armies like Grey Knights and stuff feel like they were supposed to. But the first tournament hit, and people realized that was way overpowered, and so they changed the rule for everybody. And so even if you're a casual player who wasn't going to play a really, really heavy Alpha Strike list, you doesn't matter. You can't play it anymore. And so there was this idea that, we had our game, we liked it, and you competitive guys ruined it. And so what I think could happen with one page rules is they're going to do it the way 40K should have done it. When 40K had its three ways to play, it had, was it open, narrative, and matched?
mhm.
That's I think I said this in one of my videos. That's not three ways to play. You really only need two, maybe three. You need casual, competitive, and then narrative. And by having all these advanced rules and then OPR dividing them, just saying, okay, if you want casual, you play whatever ones you want. If you're going to play competitive, here's the rule sets that you use. And
Mm.
that way, it's very clearly delineating playing the game one way versus playing it another way. And they can now make tweaks to just the competitive side of the game without
Yeah.
touching the casual side.
Yeah, and it's like I think for me, I know the competitive side isn't as popular. I mean, if we would say myself, I tend to be the biggest competitive channel, although it's good to see other competitive creators get out there. I know that Don't Think, Don't Charge have just been putting out some good competitive content, and we've got the
Uh-huh.
French chain sword over there. So we're seeing it pop up, but I still feel that the casual and I view like you and Warboss Fits as sort of like the really great narrative casual stuff. Do you think that if we really can do both, and because it is one page rules, maybe we won't face some of the same problems that Games Workshop, or do you see us sort of destined to repeat history of Games Workshop, or where do
No,
you?
I think we can do it. And also, I think the competitive scene arising in OPR is a sign of its growth.
Yeah.
That if it's a big enough game that you first have enough players who want to have competitions and tournaments, and then you're able to do that. It shows you're getting bigger to the point where because a lot of players, if they don't play tournament, they just want to play casual. But to have a tournament means you have enough players that play regularly and want to have a tournament.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a sign of its growth. And because the game started more casual and the competitive is kind of, I don't want to say it has had to muscle its way in, but the game for a long time has been focused on the casual side. If it were to go the way of catering more to the competitive, that would be 20 years down the road, kind of like what happened with 40K, that it started off as a fun game. And then people said, well, we can have tournaments, store tournaments, local tournaments. And then that's grown into things like the Las Vegas Open and these massive tournaments. So OPR, it's possible to make that mistake, but I think it's far enough down the road that we can make the subtle course corrections now to prevent the game from being driven by the competitive scene rather than allow each side to have its space.
I want to get your thoughts on this competitive casual paradigm because the reason that I got interested in OPR competitively because I felt it was a good, tight game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I played a lot of war games, and there's some war games that I'm like, I don't want to do this competitively. It's like, just I'll happily play it casually. Like for me, like Warhammer the Old World is a great example of that. Really fun game to play casually. But like the moment you start seeing some of those harder lists, and you're like, "Ugh, I'm okay."
Yeah.
But OPR, I feel like would you agree it is a pretty tight game? It is a
Yep.
game that I feel as well is pretty skill focused, right? Or do you not see it that way? I see it as a pretty tight game that sure works great casually. That's just because it's a solid game, you know.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, no war game is going to be perfectly balanced without losing what makes it fun.
Mhm.
But the thing that I think one page rules does that help keep it, as you put it, nice and tight in terms of its rules, is it's based in some kind of equation.
Yeah.
If you're on the Patreon, you can go to that custom army builder and you can create whatever unit or hero you want, and it simply adjusts the points based on what equipment and special rules. Like everything has a set value, and so the more you assign to a specific model, it's going to be more powerful, but it's going to be more expensive.
Mhm.
Whereas I don't know if there's any kind of actual equation or hard and fast table that determines the points for something like 40K.
Hmm.
And so by having one page
That table
rules,
is the sales funnel. I think it's called
right.
the sales
Yeah.
funnel.
Whatever new army is, that's the most powerful one. And then in 6 months, it gets a nerf. And, that's the sales model. You're exactly right. Whereas I found when I first started playing one page rules, I was amazed at how balanced it was.
Yeah.
That the friends and I who played, it never was by turn two, you never knew who was going to win. Whereas in 40K, by turn two, you had a pretty good idea as long as the dice continued to roll the way they did.
I turn
And so,
zero sometimes,
yeah, in some cases, yeah, yeah. And so with one page rules, it would come down to the last activation, or it would be
Yeah.
very close. Or if there was a bit of a more one sided or a bit of a blowout, both players could agree it was because you made that decision
Yeah.
or that one dice roll or something. It hinged on
It's a
something
whole different
specific.
it's a whole different scale.
Yeah,
And that's good to hear that it is, there's a general consensus that it is a pretty tight game. The other thing that I think to just sort of, and there's a lot, we can go on forever, but I have to ask you about the lore because
okay.
that's been huge this past year. Two lore books, faction books. There's been a huge push in lore.
Yes.
How have you kind of felt about the OPR lore, the push for it, the need for it, the importance of it? What's your sort of overall feel for the lore? Um,
That's a good question. So, as far as just the general concept of creating its own lore, I think that's another sign that OPR is kind of growing. That it's coming into its own. It doesn't want to just be 40K light. It's trying to create itself. It's now going to be its own game. We're going to have unique factions. It will always acknowledge its roots, and that's part of the reason it's able to draw new people. But by trying to create its own lore, it's trying to create its own identity of a sort. Um, as far as how's that going, first, I don't envy whoever has to try and create it because since the game started as a adaptation or as a knockoff of 40K, you're already locked into a lot of lore,
hmm,
or at least factions. And like if you play Grimdark Future, you have to find some way to have an emperor like figure, super soldiers, all this stuff that basically is just a repeat of 40K. So you have to you're kind of putting that straitjacket where you're wanting to create your own thing, but at the same time you're already put in a very small box because of the origin of the game. So when the Grimdark Future book came out, bought it and read it the first day it came out, and I was kind of, huh, yeah, because and I said this, I made a couple videos about it. I was going to do a super long deep dive into it, but other things kind of got in the way. But as I read it, I didn't get the feeling that I was reading a lore book for a war game. I got the feeling I was reading a lore book for an RPG.
Yeah, I got that feeling
That
too.
there was
Yeah.
so much emphasis on building not just a world, but building infinite worlds. And I remember looking through the book, and there's all these pictures of all these alien races and stuff like that, that they're not factions in the game. And
Hmm.
you don't interact with them. And I thought, this is what I see when I look through the D&D book
Hmm.
because it's trying to introduce you to the wide open world of Dungeons and Dragons and all these places you could go and all these races you could interact with. Whereas when I was flipping through one page rules, you see these pictures and you think, okay, so what is this?
What's the
Is
stat
he,
block? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
what's the stat block? Is he hinting at future armies? But then you look at some of there are these cute little, bug things or these gigantic, fat guys with like six arms that look like that character from the Star Wars prequels. And I just think, what is he? What's the goal here? And then the other thing, and I brought this up, and I actually had a talk with this with One Page More when we talked about it. There's a distinct lack of warfare in in,
Yeah.
in the grimdark future,
Yeah.
and I made that video. It was the most popular video I've ever done on my channel. Just surprised the heck out of me, where I looked at lore just from a grimdark standpoint and looked at one page rules, Warhammer
Uh-huh.
40K, and then Trench Crusade, and I
Yeah.
saw them almost like the spectrum. Trench Crusade was super gritty to the point where like my 9-year-old daughter is not going to look at that book when I get it. There's no
Yeah.
way I'm letting her look through that book. One page rules is kind of the kid friendly.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing in that lore book that I would be concerned with a child seeing or reading. And there are all these passages where it keeps emphasizing that in the grimdark future of one page rules, we try and avoid conflict. And I'm reading that going, this is not the foundation for a war game. This is a great foundation for an RPG world where there's the potential for conflict. But it just seems that in the world as written in that books, all you have are minor skirmishes here or there.
It does feel, I think you're right, but I think the other side of it is that the world actually feels a lot more targeted to the firefight version because they mention a lot of like
Yeah.
in this book there's a lot of like mercenaries. Like it feels like that's really that book is pitched towards like
Yes.
almost the small scale version of it.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, like I would say this. One of the advantages, especially of the Grimdark Future book, is that you did have some room for bad stuff to happen. You
Mhm.
know, it's like we could actually start our own homicidal or genocidal wars. You know, it's like, but
Sure.
wait, the players can start. I wish they would have had that at the end. Ghost. I know there's no wars in here, but start your own. You know?
Right. I mean, you have the wider universe. Like they say, okay, here's the Sirius sector. There's a whole lot of other places. So all you have to say is, yeah, what's happening here? It's actually over there outside of what you would normally see. But um, I remember reading about in the World Book when the alien hives invaded and everyone's freaking out, everyone's fighting against them. It's this existential crisis, and they just wanted to talk. And
And the
I
war ended
stopped.
once
The war ended once one of
once
the
they
Tao
started
went,
talking.
well, all we need to do is translate it. And literally, the alien hives just were asking to borrow a cup of sugar, and they didn't know why everyone's shooting at them. And I read that, and I just kind of stopped, and I thought, that's not a grim dark future. So, so I'm a little more, I don't know, hesitant, cautious with the lore. I've had increasingly a lot of comments from viewers that say OPR rules, 40K universe.
I'm that
And
person,
yeah,
I'm one of those guys. I'm a, I'm a 40K universe. I'm like a 90s 40K universe. I'm a second edition 40K universe where there's not Primarchs popping out of every corner of the space, and like the way the tournament scene is, there is like they have mass Silver Boot Gelman. So like I just imagine if those were real, where Boot Gelman is like traveling everywhere, like I have to go in this
yeah,
battle, in this battle, in this battle, in this battle, and it's like.
yeah, yeah. So I'm like I said, because I want to very much see one page rules as a whole go. So that's why I still, when I do my bat reports, most of them are set in one page rules lore. I use the names of the one page rules factions and things like
Mhm.
that. The Malhadra campaign, having a lot of fun working through those. Those are some great rule sets and mission things. But at the same time, I do think it would be fun to play one page rules, but in the 40K universe,
Yeah.
like actually have Blood Angels versus Necrons, not Blood Brothers versus the Robot Legion. And because what one page rules has really offered, I think, is a fun, basic, but still complex enough set of rules to be enjoyable without being overwhelming.
Mhm.
And so, to me, why not have the best of both worlds? Why not have a game system that's fun to play in a story universe that's really geared towards that kind of a world where there's constant conflict and battle and anything you can think of, it's probably happening somewhere in that universe.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I could talk for hours. And so, but there's one thing I do have to bring up. So, for one, OPR hitting the mainstream. So, you actually just had a recent, and I want to talk about this interview that you had with the miniature wargaming guys, sort of
Mm-hmm.
in context, because your interview with them, it's similar when I saw an interview with Warboss Fitz with Northern Exile, but this is actually the biggest one. I feel mini wargaming is huge.
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
you have thought a year ago that you would be interviewing some of the big wigs over at Mini Wargaming? You know?
No, when I started the Line of Sight podcast, the intention was I'm going to talk to super local, the other small channels like mine. Like let's start at the bottom
Uh-huh.
community and get to know everybody here, and then the hope was the channel would grow enough that I might get more of a presence and I could start to reach out to some of the bigger ones and say, hey, would you mind being on this podcast? It's not just I'm not just some kid trying to get some time with you. Like I'm really interested in talking with you. And so on a whim, when I saw that Mini Wargaming had filmed and had published a one page rules battle report, and I knew they had done it previously when Mini Wargaming Dave and Brett from Goobertown did that one
Hmm.
page rules battle. And I thought, okay, they've heard of it, they're familiar with it. And then when I saw that first battle report appear on the mini wargaming, I thought, why not? So I literally, I think I even used their customer service email. Don't do that, folks. Go through proper channels. But I contacted them some way and I said, could you forward this to the right people? But I have a small channel. It's dedicated to a lot of OPR content. And since you guys just started playing, I would love to interview you for it. And I hit send and completely forgot about it because in my mind, there's no way that Mini Wargaming is going to talk to me. And then a few days later, I get a response. I think it was from Josh over there. And he said, sure,
Oh,
when are
cool.
you available? And he said, I'll talk to Luca and Scary because they're the three who've been playing it. And he said, we'll see how many of us we can get at once to sit down and talk with you. And it took about 2 months to maybe a month and a half to get all of our schedules. But yeah, then I sat down and was talking to these guys who for years and years I've been watching their 40K content. Like I learned the rules of 40K when I got back into it from watching battle reports on mini wargaming. So it was really kind of surreal to now be talking with them about this game and to get their input on it. And so like
And
I
that they're
was
playing
thrilled.
it, that
Yeah.
OPR is becoming a regular. I would think that's a regular game on mini wargaming, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
And I think part of that is because I know when I don't remember the name of it, but one page rules
They had some sort
and
of, yeah, I remember this happened
the three
last
of
year. I
them.
know what you're talking about. There was some
Yeah,
sort of
three
collaboration.
big STL creators got together, and during the video, Mini Warming Gaming Dave was there as well. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, they're looking to make connections with bigger entities. Like OPR wants to grow, and why not do it through something like Mini Wargaming? So Mini Wargaming, they've done lots of other games. I know they've tried like Infinity, and I think they did Flames of War, Bolt Action. Like they've tried lots and lots of different games. So it's definitely a sign that OPR is getting bigger if now Mini Wargaming has dedicated playlists
Hmm.
specifically to one page rules. And the other thing I like, this is something that I need to do better on my channel, is they're using the OPR minis in the OPR games.
Yeah.
Most times when I play anybody playing one page rules, they're all using Games Workshop minis, with a few exceptions. Like some folks, when they got into it, not coming over from 40K, they're printing out the official OPR miniatures. But it really is, it's going to give a lot of people a chance to see the game, see the models, and see it presented well. Because mini wargaming, high production value, a lot of experience with the people who are filming and editing. So yeah, it can't but help OPR.
Hmm. Well, Chris, it's been the last thing I want to sort of get your thought on. So 2024,
Yeah,
I would say it's a success. Give us some predictions. So you have to put on your Nostradamus hat here.
predictions. I teach
2025.
history. I do the past, not the future.
Yeah. But how about some where do you kind of see OPR in the mix in 2025? And what do you kind of, maybe not predictions, but what are you thinking about 2025 with OPR,
Okay, well, you look at what did they do in 2024. So they had their first tournament, and
Mhm.
which meant they've learned some of the hiccups, some of the things that can go wrong, but they've learned that they can put on a tournament. So I think we'll definitely see another one, probably same UK Games Expo, but maybe a bigger one. I mean, if OPR is going to gaming conventions like Spiel, maybe they'll go there and not just to show off stuff, but maybe they'll try and start organizing small tournaments.
Mhm.
And since they have that experience from 2024, it might go a little smoother so they can run more of them. So that's one thing. I think we'll see an expansion of tournament and competitive play. We'll absolutely see an expansion of the lore, especially through the faction books.
Mhm.
And obviously they're starting by doing faction books on their unique stuff. And so I think we'll see more of that. If you want to know which factions are coming next, look at the factions that are unique to one page rules. Those are being the ones that I think will probably get the faction books next. They've switched to just a once a year rules update instead of every 6 months. And that was one of the things in 2024 that Tano learned really quick is you can't make too many changes really fast, or people get
Mm,
angry, and then you switch back and they get even angrier. And so we'll see that yearly update, which is what GW said they were going to do in 8th edition, and it didn't last very long. But massive I don't see edition changes that wipe the table clean and we restart.
yeah.
There might be significant changes, but I don't see anything more dramatic. So more tournaments, more lore development. We'll get to keep seeing more faction renewals,
Mhm.
or armies that don't have models starting to get them. I'm wondering how long before he starts to tackle some of the biggies. Like, when are we going to see a Battle Brothers line of
Mm.
STLs? That one might be kind of scary. Or maybe he goes, look, everyone has Space Marines. Nobody needs Battle Brothers. But you never know.
Mm.
So
Okay.
those are my predictions. They're pretty safe predictions. I'm basically saying, well, they've walked in this direction for 20 years. So the next step will probably be in that direction too.
But
That's my guess.
I think that's good too. And one of the things that I give credit to the owner, you know, everyone makes mistakes, but I feel if there's one thing I would say about him that I've picked up is that ambition. There's definitely some ambition there to
Mm-hmm.
continue to push this, even if maybe some, like I said, if anything you could say 2024 is that he tried to do too much. And I think that
Yeah.
is possibly a good thing in the sense that, he is, there is that ambition there. Um,
What do you think's going to happen?
boy, I think I think, my big thing that I'm really going to think could explode is the Ranger program. I know I've
Yes.
joined it,
Yeah.
and I think that is actually where I think if they do it right and they really do coordinate, there could be a big explosion from the ground up. I think that is actually them starting the Ranger program, I think is their best decision. I think that because I think there's probably so many groups that are playing that don't know about each other that maybe you
Yeah.
get two Rangers that pop up in the same city and they find out they're here and all of a sudden we're
Yes.
posting something.
Yeah.
I
You go from two small communities that are not necessarily struggling, but they're small, and suddenly you're like, actually, we have one community that's double the size.
Yeah, yeah. I think that to me is my biggest. I think if they do the Ranger program right, where they're trying, from what they sound like, I think they've got the right ideas if they can implement it.
Mhm.
It's all about implementing it. The Ranger program, I think we could actually see a pretty huge buildup in OPR.
Yes.
I and I'm going to be a little more bold in my predictions. I think that 10th edition is going to be a rough year for 10th edition 40K. I
Hmm.
think that people are going to start dropping out. They know that 11th is coming. This is sort of we're on the other side of the mountain. I think that we're probably going to see some more growth. I think we could see the first, we could see. I think if the Ranger program and GW continuing to do that, there's actually going to be some massive growth in 2025. But it's going to come from the ground up. But I
Right.
think it
And
hinges on that Ranger program.
and that's what now that you'd mentioned that could be where we see the competitive and the tournament scene grow. So there'll be the big ones like the UK Games Expo, but if you can have monthly, or not, maybe not monthly, but monthly meetings, maybe once or twice a year, tournaments at local levels, that'll draw in more people, and the ability to have, I think this is a big one, the ability to have contact points put on the
Mhm.
website, so folks can go in and say, I live in this state or this country. Is there anyone around here who can help me get into this game? And now there's like, yes, there's someone that's technically vetted in a sense by OPR. That's your official contact. Because one of
And
the scariest things for getting into a tabletop game is if you're doing it by yourself, it's intimidating. If you've never painted a model, if you've never played a game, it's nice to have someone kind of shepherd you into it.
hey, and we remember this is the War Machine model. And for people who don't, me and you are a little old. We remember War Machine at its height was beating 40K. It was the only game that's ever done it. And for me, it did it off the backs of what do they call those guys? The roller. I forgot what they called them. They have a name for them.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know Malifaux called them the henchman
Yeah,
program.
but War Machine did it better than anyone. If they can follow that model, I could see one-page rules. It's probably not going to rival, like, be more popular, but I could see this thing being played in every game shop, maybe by 2026, where basically every game shop in the United States or the major countries has one OPR group in it. And if that happens, that's huge,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that would be huge. So bold predictions, but I'm gonna stick with it.
I mean, it's not like there's a penalty if you're wrong. So we're not telling people to invest in something. It's just we're taking a game and a product that we really enjoy and wishing it the best. So
Well, yeah, and with bold conditions, if you're right, you can like point it out afterwards, and if you're wrong,
yeah.
it's like, no one remember
Well, then you can just say,
that.
well, here are the factors of why it didn't turn out quite the way I thought. But no, I've also filled in the application to join the Ranger program because I already run. They're not regular events, like not every month without fail, but I do stuff at my local gaming store frequently already, and so might as well make it official.
There you go. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I could say go and subscribe to his channel, but if you're watching this, you're already probably subscribed. But if somehow you haven't, please go to Good Enough Gaming.
I appreciate that.
Is there anything you want to just tell people about Good Enough Gaming that you just got going on, or any things that you going to be putting out that maybe want to leak, anything like
Um, well, it is mostly one page rules focused, but it's not solely one page rules. I
that?
do branch out. I like trying other games, and so every month, 4 bat reps, well, 3 bat reps, one a week, and then throughout the week, other videos, painting tutorials, commentary stuff. So about 80% of it's one page rules, but I like testing out other games as well. So even if you're not solely a one page rules person, I
Mhm.
if I hear about a game that people are saying this is fun, I try it out. I do a bat rep for it. So it's a place to learn about other games because I got into one page rules because I learned about another game. And so who knows what other great games are out there that I can add to the repertoire. So yeah, keep watching because it's not just one page rules mostly, but every once in a while, let's try something different and see what we can find.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks for having me on.